All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Overcoming Workplace Uncertainty, Why Successful Workplace Design Begins with Data. I'm Jennifer Getz, the Editorial Director of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by VergeSense. Before we get started, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. Our speakers today are on video, and if you would like to view us along the top of your screen, look for the bar in your window to pull down so we are visible to you. Next, please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions via the question box at any time. There will be a Q&A portion after this presentation, so please type your questions there and send to us. Throughout this webinar, we will be including some poll questions, which will appear on your screen for about 30 seconds. If at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send a message to us via the question section and someone on our team will answer you privately. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. Clicking on that arrow will either expand or collapse the control panel. So please be sure the panel is expanded so you can access the question box. Today, I'll be having a discussion with Elo Ofedele, the head of new business for VergeSense. Elo has 20 years of experience as a technology executive in a variety of industries, including fintech and proptech. He has senior positions at Thomson Reuters, Moody's, and several startups in the proptech space. He currently leads new business efforts at VergeSense and holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in IT from Northeastern University. Elo, thank you for speaking with us today.
Thanks, Jen. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started. Elo, tell us about some of the workplace trends that you've observed in the past year.
Yeah, so over the past year, workplace leaders have been grappling with getting people to come back to the office at scale. Obviously, post-pandemic, most people have worked remotely, and companies that we work with and more broadly are seeing less than 20% attendance to the office. So the challenge is, for these leaders is, how do we bring people back? And there's been a lot of dialogue around hybrid working, or giving people the option of coming into the office a couple of days a week and then keeping remote as an option. This obviously depends on the industry. So, in banking, for example, it's really not possible if you're a trader to work remotely because you have regulatory mandates to be at a trading desk. But for other companies where this is an option, it's certainly something that companies are considering and trying to figure out the best way to make it happen. And along with that, given the fact that if people are going to be working remotely, there'll be fewer requirements for space in the office. They were thinking the actual physical office layout. So, many companies that we talk to are actually moving to an unassigned model and increasing the number of collaboration spaces while reducing the number of desks, anticipating that people won't come into the office to do heads down work.
Yeah, more desk sharing, just in general.
Now, one interesting thing that was in the news last week is the pendulum might be swinging the other way for some companies. I think Elon Musk recently mandated that everybody on the corporate side come back 40 hours a week. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yes, absolutely. So before we move ahead, we'd like to ask our audience a quick poll question, which will appear on your screen for about 30 seconds. So what do you think is the main reason employees come into the office, either to work collaboratively, focus on individual tasks, or to attend meetings? Give you a few minutes to address that. Or seconds, I should say. Okay, awesome. So 65%, the majority results said to work collaboratively, which touches on what you were talking about before.
Yeah, that's totally in line with what we're seeing from our customers broadly.
Absolutely. So with all of these changes that are happening just in this industry, how are CRE leaders, reacting to this changing landscape?
So it's interesting. Many of them are adopting a wait and see approach. Nobody really knows what's going to happen or what the outcome is going to be. One thing is for sure, remote work is here to stay in some form or fashion. So a lot of the companies that we talk to are reacting by trying to facilitate that, which means there are changes that need to be made to HR policy. So in some companies, it's culturally not acceptable to be out of the office for several reasons. One of them being the fact that mentoring new young workers is more difficult if they've never been in the office. So during the pandemic, many companies increased the number of employees significantly, and many of those employees have never been in the office, which is going to make it hard to help them develop their careers. So these companies are reacting by trying to put policy in place that allows them to effectively manage employees who have never been in the office or who are working remotely. And one thing that's come up quite a bit is ensuring the equity between people who work in person and people who are working remotely.
Absolutely. So what are enterprises doing to adapt to this like unpredictable attendance and workplace uncertainty?
So one thing that's kind of critical is trying to figure out exactly what's happening in order to adapt. And in order to do that, they need to collect data to inform these decisions. So many of these companies are sort of measuring what's happening when people actually come into the workplace, and then figuring out what types of spaces they're using, how long they're staying, how often they come. And all of these things are necessary in order to figure out whether they need to make changes to their portfolios overall. We've also talked to companies that are modifying their existing leases. So typically, companies are leasing space for 10 years or more. We're hearing more and more that companies are looking to renegotiate those leases into shorter terms because they just don't know what the future is going to bring and whether or not they're going to need that much space in coming years. We've also seen companies implementing social agendas in the workplace. So the workplace is kind of transforming from a place to go and do heads down work to a collaboration hub of sorts, where people come in with the specific intent of meeting with each other and not just working, but also playing together. So we've seen a lot of that. Companies are doing social hours and meet and greets and lunches and that type of thing, especially since many of them grew significantly during the pandemic when everyone was remote.
That's awesome. I'm sure a lot of employees are happy to have that. And even just, we've been in our houses for so long, just to get back to that collaborative space is just so refreshing. And, we're still kind of in this phase where it's gotten so much better, but I imagine there's still a lot of just uncertainty amongst workers in general.
There really is. And quite frankly, the workplace leaders are really doing a great job being creative about this. I've been to a number of conferences recently, and everybody agrees that in-person work has a profound positive impact on company culture when people can sit in the same room and commiserate with one another. In fact, we just had our first all-company offsite here at VergeSense a couple of weeks ago, and getting the whole company together. In this case, it wasn't under a roof, but in the woods. Was just incredible. I got to meet 50% of the company that I had never met in person before, and it's just a completely different level of cohesion that you can get working virtually.
Oh, absolutely. So I know you talked a little bit about this, or you'd mentioned it, but speaking of data, we're going to move ahead and look at how workplace design really starts with data. So we are going to move ahead and ask another poll question for our audience. So really, what data are you most interested in? Select one of the following. Which of my spaces are not being used? Which days of the week are most busy? And which space types are most popular? You have about 30 seconds just to submit your responses. All right, the results are in, and this time it's a lot closer, actually. So we have 40% for which space types are most popular, and which days of the week, which of my spaces are not being used. That was pretty close. So the first one was which space types are most popular. Very interesting. Is that what you expected, Ella?
Yeah, I think all three of those are sort of relevant. The important thing is to understand behavioral patterns as people come back to work, because those patterns will inform you on allocation of space, redistribution of space, but it all comes from having the right data to work with. So I think, prior to being in this position where we need this level of resolution, companies were satisfied with collecting badge data from access control systems, which would tell you how many people attended the building or came to work on a given day. Or they would collect data from their wireless networks, which would tell them, roughly the distribution of people within space, how many people on average were on a floor. But now that companies have to be more surgical about space allocation, you need high resolution data that's able to, get you to a point where you can see where people are using space, what types of spaces they're using, for how long, where you have spaces that are unused, so that you can, optimize your portfolio in that way. The patterns of behavior in spaces, collaboration spaces like conference rooms. We're expecting there's going to be a much higher level of collaboration as the new feature of work unfolds. And so it's important for organizations to have the right types of spaces with the right capacities to match the way that people are working. So I think that, collecting data with that level of resolution is going to be very important. And it's not just quantitative data. So it's not just how many people where for how long. It's also why, right? So I think many of the space planners and workplace leaders that we talk to are doing a combination of deploying sensor technology that can measure at a high level of resolution what spaces are being used, for how long, and how many of them. But they're also asking the question, why? Like, why is this space type popular? Why do we see meeting sizes of 4 people? Why are these particular conference rooms more popular than others? And it could be the answer could be the type of technology that's deployed, the business function of the users of the space, or just the organizational culture overall. If people prefer in-person meetings to virtual meetings, so the first step is collecting this data and doing so at scale.
So based on what you said there, from what you're seeing so far, what would you say are some of the most popular workspaces right now, like workspace designs, based on some of the data that you're seeing?
Definitely collaborative spaces. So again, most people won't make the drive into an office to sit at a desk and do heads down work. Most people that are used to working remotely and doing so effectively will want to come into the office to collaborate with other people, and usually that happens in collaboration spaces.
Absolutely, awesome. So really, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but really, so how does data play a role in designing a very purposeful workspace? So not just, a place for people to come and meet, but also a way to kind of encourage productivity and to help people just in general, further their goals.
Yeah, so data gives you an insight into behavioral patterns. So it's important to understand, and when we work with a lot of companies that are doing this, they've deployed multiple designs. So they have stand-up desks, they have informal working areas, focus rooms. So deploying those spaces is usually a hypothesis or an educated guess, right? We're going to build this and see if they come. But then it's important to measure and see which ones of those spaces are actually being used and how often they're being used, and potentially by which business functions. And then that gives organizations the chance or the opportunity to evolve their workplace design to meet what their employees actually need. The concept of activity-based working, started a number of years ago, where it was basically conceived that people will be more productive in the right types of work environment. It's especially important now when people are coming into work to make sure that it's worth their while and that they can be more productive in the office than they are sitting at home.
That's great. So data is so valuable in helping people plan everything that they need for their office space. But, how does incorrect or insufficient data really impact the bottom line?
So it's very expensive to collect, aggregate, and analyze data, right? You need the collection mechanisms. You need the right kind of expertise to glean the insights from the data. So it's really important that the right data is collected in order for it to be effective and efficiently used. As I mentioned before, some years back, organizations were satisfied with collecting badge data, which is very high level and tells you how many people were in the office. But if you're looking to do things like increase your or improve your workplace design or match your space to the requirements of your employees, again, you need a much higher level of resolution. You need to understand what spaces people are using, for how long, at what frequency, and that implies that you need a data collection and an analytic mechanism that allows you to get that level of resolution. And if you don't, then the time and cost of collecting data that doesn't necessarily give you actionable insights is just not worth it. The return on the investment is not there. So my advice, and I've done this across a couple of companies in the workplace analytics space, is ask yourself why you need the data before you decide how you're going to collect it. Ask yourself what your intended outcomes are, and that will drive your technology decisions.
Great, that's awesome. That's some great advice for our audience. Now we're going to shift into discuss kind of what all of this really means for the future. And we'd like to ask our audience to participate in one last poll question. What do you think the future of work will be? Select one of the following: in person, hybrid, work from home, or work from anywhere. Yeah, the results are coming in. Okay, so far and above, the winner was hybrid with 74%. And then after that was work from anywhere with 24%. So I want to also give a special thanks to our audience for answering these poll questions. So Ello, what do you think about this result? Is this something you were expecting as well?
Those results are not surprising at all. I think deep down, most people want optionality and not an absolute one way or the other. And I think hybrid in the right form achieves that. One option that wasn't on that list, which I heard about recently at the conference, was that the Metaverse is going to play an increasing role in the workplace of the future, meaning that if you could virtually participate in the meeting in Japan and see the Japanese building and be immersed in in that space, even though you're sitting in the United States, that might be a really cool thing. I think we're years away from that, but it's definitely something that's also being talked about, is creating a virtual version of the physical workspace as a destination for people.
Imagine that would be great just in terms of travel as well. Limit
Yeah,
the need
I'm
to.
sure. Yeah, I'm sure that would cut down on travel budgets significantly. But then I think before that becomes a reality, we'll have to get avatars to a place where they have the same facial expressions as we're capable of doing in real life.
Absolutely. Okay, so now with that being said, I really am interested if you could tell us a little bit about how spatial intelligence really plays into the design of workplaces for the future.
Yeah, so again, this all comes back down to data and measuring the right things in the right way to determine patterns of use, and then use that information to optimize your workplace in the right way. Spatial intelligence, as we define it, is using a technology that allows you to react to the changing needs of the workforce based on what the data is telling you. So here at VergeSense, an example, we use our low-resolution computer vision-based sensors to measure anonymously the number of people occupying the space for how long. We measure occupancy status, but we also are, in coming months, going to be looking at ways to do things like detect floor plan changes. And if you think about it, the workforce the workplace is going to become a lot more modular, because people are going to need different space types and in a more dynamic way than we've ever seen before. And being able to detect when the floor plate's changing, and then adapting, organizational, the rest of the organization around those changes, and capturing that information so that you can capture the insights as to how people prefer to work, and then configure more spaces that way. Those are the types of things that spatial intelligence will enable for us. In addition to furniture layout changes and those types of things, spatial intelligence will also, I think, evolve to a place where we can do things like asset tracking in the workplace, using the same technology that you use to collect data about people movement.
I imagine that'll be great just in general if you're moving things around or moving spaces, and just having all of that information just so readily available, just if you're making just design changes in your office. So that's
yeah. So just understanding, people are going to vote with their feet, and again, we have a number of customers that are doing this as we speak. They have desks on wheels, they have filing cabinets on wheels, and organically, teams in neighborhoods configure furniture to enhance the way that they collaborate, increase their proximity to one another. And those are data points that are very important to capture because they can inform how teams work and what types of designs should be deployed in the future.
Very cool. So I'm kind of curious, just in your vision of what you think from your perspective of what you think, the future of the workplace really looks like with this technology.
Yeah. So the workplace is undergoing a digital transformation at large right now. Some of our largest customers have think tanks around this, and are spending a lot of time trying to see around the corner. So there are a few things that we know for sure. One, we know that there's going to be significantly increased mobility. So people are going to work from home. They're going to leverage virtual technology. They're going to expect the office to offer an environment where they can do their best collaborative type of work. We know that employees are going to increasingly expect workplace leaders to provide them with tools that increase productivity. So things like being able to book a space before they come to the office and know exactly where I'm going to be sitting, or being able to book a conference room from my phone, or being able to determine the best time to go to the gym based on the person count that's displayed from the data that we're collecting. So all of these are examples of sort of like what the workplace of the future is going to look like, and some of it's here now, depending on how evolved the company is. There's one company that we're working with that actually has a means to provide their employees with information on where to park, which garage is the least busy, and they can get that information on their smartphone before they drive into the office. So things like that are going to transform the way that work is done today.
Oh, that's so cool. That's incredible. And it's so cool to see these things already taking shape and in motion today, which I think is pretty neat. I have one question I wanted to ask, just how are enterprises really, evolving with their tech stacks to solve for friction in the workplace?
Yeah, so, traditionally real estate was not a very tech savvy area of the business, and that's changed overnight. And there's a whole proliferation of vendors with different capabilities that allow for things like managing floor plans, keeping track of leased and owned assets. We have apps, concierge apps that are deployed out to employees that allow people to order lunch from their phones, or as I mentioned earlier, book a desk or a room, or find out how busy the gym is. There's wayfinding technology, there's digital signage technology that shows sort of like a live view of a floor map, and so people can see which floors are busy and which ones aren't. I've even seen at one of our customers, they have windows that double as whiteboards, right? And you can project your computer display onto the window. So there's all this really cool stuff out there. The important thing, though, is to make it work seamlessly. So this technology is offered by a multitude of vendors. And while we like to talk about integrations a lot, it's really important that those integrations are purposeful and are frictionless, so that there's not a heavy IT lift to make these things work together in concert to provide the employees with a seamless and frictionless experience. And it's equally important to the workplace leaders that as they source this technology, they're mindful as to how these different components will work together.
Very cool how they can seamlessly blend together like that. And I'm sure all of those capabilities will be so great, especially in hybrid environments where people aren't in the office every day, and maybe they can limit desk space. There's not as much need for as many, as many things in the office necessarily, if not as many people are coming in. So that's also a wonderful factor as well.
For sure.
But yeah, no, I wanted to also just kind of quickly ask, so what is some, I know we had talked about some technology just in general, but any other specific technologies or innovations that you think, maybe might be here sooner than we know it? Maybe it hasn't been implemented yet, but maybe, within the next like 5 to 10 years, let's say, where do you see kind of the office space evolving?
Yeah. So the big thing that is the big theme is that people are expecting that emerging technologies like the Metaverse will play a significant role in what the office becomes. And the drivers behind it are, what if we can reduce travel significantly, reduce our carbon footprint, by having virtual meetings, but have those meetings as close to reality as possible, because the person in the virtual environment will feel like they're in the office. They'll see the same thing they'd see if they were in the office. The only difference being that it's a digital version of in real life, right? So that's a very interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to see where that technology goes. It's actually already reaching maturity with digital twins. So what happens a lot of times is companies deploy digital twin software, which creates a virtual representation of the physical space, and they're able to use that virtual representation and the data that they're collecting from a variety of sensors to optimize the way they manage the space, doing everything from addressing service tickets to identifying faults to finding hot zones or cool zones faster than walking the floor. So that's sort of a glimpse into the future, and I think that same principle is going to apply to the employee experience. So today we're using digital twins to manage space, but at some point we're going to use the same virtual technology to manage the employee experience in space.
Awesome, that's great. I do have an audience question that I want to ask you very quickly. Would you consider the future office with desk assigned to specific person if they come into the office in person, or an area of desk designated for hybrid working people, or totally remote work? So similar to more of a first come, first serve. So, almost more of how are we going to kind of schedule with this hybrid situation?
I had this conversation with actually one of our customers just last week, and we were talking about the notion of booking a desk before coming into the office, and she challenged it pretty heavily. She basically said, well, first of all, we can't put remote work back in the box, so we know that people are going to opt to work remotely, which means that we're going to have an overage of desk inventory at most companies, which means that the concept of booking a desk is really redundant, because if I walk into an office on any given day, I'm very likely going to have a free desk to use, right? And it was hard to refute that, right? So I think we're going to see organizations that have booking policies, organizations that have a free-for-all where we have a bank of desks. It might not be a one-to-one anymore, because we know that some people are going to be working remotely a lot of the time. So they'll pick a sharing ratio that makes sense for the organization. And again, this is where data collection comes in handy. In order to figure out how many desks you really need in the neighborhood, you need to collect data on how many people are coming in over time, so that you pick a number that means that people are always going to have a desk available to them. And then finally, I don't think that we're ever going to see sort of like a mandated in office every day situation where we would need to have one-to-one desks be a thing anymore.
I was going to say it's so unique to each organization and each person's plan, and that's why the data is so critical to understand. Really just whether we need all the desks in this office, or only we can limit it to maybe 20 as opposed to like 15 or 30. So that's why, this is very interesting. So I think, Ello, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, just a parting thought is that, this is not necessarily, all of this is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that, the way that office space is allocated and distributed was ripe for transformation even before the pandemic. And what the pandemic has done and the resulting remote working has done is proven that there's a better way to do this. And it means a better quality of life for employees. It means, cost optimization for companies, and then it means sort of a transformation of culture, potentially in a good way if we get this right. So looking forward to see how things unfold in the next couple of months. And thank you to the audience for your time. This has been fun.
Awesome. Okay, now we are going to move ahead to the Q&A portion. Ello, thank you again for sharing your insights on this topic with us, and thank you to our audience for sending in questions and participating in our polls. We'll now move into our Q&A portion to address the questions that you've sent in, and you can please continue to submit questions. So we'll take a look. So one of the questions we have here is, what should I prioritize when planning/designing for effective workspaces?
So that all depends on the organizational objectives. Again, I'll go back to the example. If you're in financial services and you have a trading floor, there's really not much to change because people are going to come in and they're going to need dedicated space, and maybe you can make that space sweeter by giving them 2 monitors or something, but there's not much to change there. So your planning really has to do with job function, organizational culture, and the needs of the tenant. And sometimes, survey is a really effective way of figuring out what people need to do their best work.
That's awesome. Do you have any maybe advice just in general for, maybe specific industries or, specific maybe types of facility managers in how they can, what they should think about when planning and designing their effective workplaces? Like, what are some of the first things they should think about?
Yeah, it really depends on the organizational culture and goals again. And so I think the first step is, and we've actually worked with some customers on their future of work planning. And the first step is determining outcomes. Like, what do we want to achieve by doing this? Are we looking to reduce square footage? Are we looking to improve employee productivity? Are we looking to enhance culture? Are we looking to provide the right amenities at the right time? So it starts by asking those questions about the outcomes and then designing around that.
Okay, awesome. And we have another question here. What have you seen impede employee experience the most?
Again, employees have voted with their feet, as we've seen in recent months, and people have violently resisted mandates to go back to work, to sit at a desk for 8 hours if it doesn't make sense. So I think, I think it's a blind spot for workplace leaders or management in general that force employees' hands about how they do or where they need to do their work if they can do their best work remotely or in a hybrid fashion.
Wonderful, thank you. So I do have a few more questions here. Really quick, just looking through. So here's one that I think is interesting. Any recommendations on which architects to engage when thinking and designing a collaborative workspaces?
I do. We work with a number of them, and I wouldn't want to single out one person as a favorite on this forum, but feel free to DM me, and we can talk about your needs, and perhaps we can point you to one of our partners.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And another question we have here is, if the future of the workplace is hybrid or virtual, are companies who are calling employees back to the office being short-sighted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, again, if you look at Elon Musk's statement, it's pretty bombastic, right? Especially if the said employees have proven over the last 2.5 years that they are able to work as effectively remotely. Then it's just a really short-sighted way of looking at managing your workforce. I think the ideal outcome for companies and for employees will be the levels of flexibility that allow people to do their best work wherever they choose, while maintaining an important connection to the workplace, to collaborate with their teammates, and to justify keeping offices around. And then again, the onus is on workplace leaders to find ways to be creative about making tenants want to come back into the workplace, right? So the question is, what can you do to make it a place that people voluntarily want to go?
So that actually is a great segue into the next question that I see here. Are you seeing any trends that have been implemented by employers that are successful in attracting, employees back to the office?
As a matter of fact, yes. Well, yes and no. So we have some customers that have successfully done so, and are celebrating it quite publicly. I'll use Microsoft as an example. They have a tremendous workplace strategy and a digital transformation program, and their employees are excited about the workplace because there's technology enablement. There are the right types of spaces. Using the office is discretionary, so employees have the discretion to work remotely. But many times we've seen that the employees want to engage in person in the offices because Microsoft has just done such a great job. And then I've seen other customers that have put a lot of effort into design and into getting people back in the building. I was talking to one of our partners recently, and they have a 700 person building, and in the last 6 months they haven't seen more than 10 people come to use the building. So clearly there's some work to be done there, even though they've put a significant amount of effort into it. So it's going to depend on the company. It's going to depend on what the workplace leaders have done. It's going to depend on sort of how the company or the leaders have excited the employees about coming back, right? It's got to be, the carrot approach, not the stick approach at this point.
Awesome. So one other question we have here is, kind of starts off by saying collaboration spaces have changed so much over time. I have found the current generation does not want collaboration desks. They want old style cubicle, but may want a collaboration area to brainstorm. So kind of what have you seen in terms of people's preferences?
So, but let me just make sure I understand the question. There's a preference to desks, to standalone desks, than to collaboration rooms? Is that the question?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, well, I haven't really seen that. In fact, collaboration spaces, aka huddle rooms, have exploded in popularity over the last year. So these are smaller functional conference rooms with high-tech AV, video conferencing, and digital whiteboards and the likes that make meetings that much more productive. So for collaboration, I think that huddle rooms are significantly more attractive than standalone workstations. Yeah, but then again, this might be another cultural thing.
Yeah, I could see that as well. We have another question here. What are the options for a company that has invested in real estate for the workspace? Are there any trends in how to convert the workspace areas for other uses? Daycare space, like a health and fitness spaces, other things like that.
That's a great question, and that's sort of like this is like seen around the corner. But I was at a conference recently where somebody put it on the table to say that the workplace of the future will be a place where people come to work, play, and live even, right? So if you have a portfolio with excess capacity, and the new ways of working, you're in a 10-year lease and you're stuck in this space and you don't want to sublease it, potentially you could add a daycare, or you could add, studio apartments for, employees that want to live, and there's an advantage, having that proximity to work, right? You could use it as a social hub. So I definitely think that the workplace of the future will incorporate, more of our life outside work. And that might be one of the ways that we actually bring people back into those spaces.
That's awesome. No, I was thinking about that too, is how can you utilize the extra space that you might already have? So that was an excellent question to ask. And yeah, it seems like there's so many possibilities.
Yeah, WeWork actually tried this back in the day. They tried having like, a daycare facility called WeGrow, I think, co-located with the office space, and it was an interesting concept.
Very, very cool. Here's another question for you. Hot desking is such a cultural change for us. It's such a culture change for us. Do you have any advice on how to help us really manage this change?
Yes, I do. So if you think about it, a workstation used to be a place where we parked our family's pictures and we put our personal belongings, and you had an extra pair of shoes under the desk, and like we literally made it an extension of our home, right? And so that sense of ownership is one that is difficult to change, right? Because all of a sudden, you're going to from a familiar space where you have all of these items, personal items that personalize that space for you, to what could be considered a sterile desk, right? That's used by many. So it's definitely it's definitely a change in mindset. It's even more significant of a change in mindset for people that had personal offices, or private offices at one point, that are now being asked to use shared space. And we've definitely seen the resistance, and the change needs to come from a change in sort of culture and attitude. It needs to be supportive, and it needs to be transitional as opposed to just dropped on people. I personally, I spent almost 20 years in corporate, working for Thomson Reuters, and I had a private office that was way too much space. I didn't need that much space. And when I left that world and started working for early stage companies, my workspace was a coffee shop or a hotel lobby or a desk at WeWork, and it didn't change the quality of my work. It just took some acclimation to get there, and I think that's what it's going to come down to, making it a transition that is painless for the employee, and understanding that there is going to be some friction, because as human beings we get used to certain things, and it needs to be seen as a positive change as opposed to something being taken away. So, one of the things that the companies do is, say, listen, I'm taking away your personal desk, but you'll always have a place to sit. And we have lots of focus rooms or private rooms where if you needed an office for a day, you could take and then we'll provide you with a locker where you can keep your personal items. And if you wanted to post up in a space, in a private office for a day and have your kids' picture up and your, and any of your personal effects in the office for the day, you could certainly do so, right? But then you have the flexibility of using different space types on different days, and that might be sort of like the compromise for giving up a personal cubicle.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of, I could see that being an issue, just people having to kind of get used to and adjust. So I know you kind of touched on how you really have to ease employees into this transition, but maybe do you have any advice for leaders, our facility executives that are kind of in this position where they really do have to kind of help encourage people to come back in? Any specific suggestions?
Yeah, I'll go to a customer that just went through this recently, and he's an executive in real estate, and had a pretty fancy office. So he led by example. He gave up his office, way before asking anybody else to do so. And they saw, the benefits that he derived from doing so. And leading by example makes people feel less defensive about following suit, right? And at the end of the day, it's more sustainable to use less space. It doesn't make sense anymore for one individual to have 250 square feet of space. If you don't need that to do your job, it's expensive to heat and cool and clean. It's not good for the environment. And culturally, I mean, we've moved on from that as a society. So it's a matter of sort of like leading by example and showing people the value of doing so.
Absolutely. So we have one other question here. Kind of, again, it goes back to leadership. How far along do you feel that corporate leaders are in bridging their willingness to supply the resources you mentioned with investment and costs it will take to make this possible for employees?
So, we go to a lot of conferences, and this is the conversation that's taking place with every Fortune 1000 right now. They're all in the same boat. They want people back in the office. They have, for the most part, more space than they need, except for the companies that are growing really fast. They have spaces that may not necessarily be compatible with the way that people are working. It's in their best interests to optimize the spaces in a way that maximize productivity, which has a direct impact on both top and bottom line. So, insightful leaders are going to make the investment because the long-term gain is definitely there. The return on that investment is very clear.
Absolutely. No, I think it's so worth it. And even, kind of dialing back to what you were talking about including, more just making those investments in maybe a daycare, in maybe, a health facility. These are all things that, it could kind of be a one-stop shop for people that maybe they want to go to the gym as well, or they want to have different, abilities, and just making, in daycare, especially for, working mothers, that's a whole other area of just convenience for the employee. That
Absolutely.
that I think is just beneficial in general. Yeah, so hold on, let me take a look if we have any other questions here. So here's another question I have. I guess, how do you create equity balance in industries with different working types? Somebody asked, for example, healthcare.
Equity balance for
Mhm.
industries with different working types. I want to just make sure I understand the question.
Yes, that's how it was phrased.
Okay, yeah. So equity is a big conversation,
Mhm.
and it transcends just being in the workplace. It also
Mhm.
involves remote workers. So the question is like, if I elect to work remotely, am I giving up an opportunity of the face time that will get me on a manager's radar for a promotion, right?
Mhm.
Or if I give up my desk for an unassigned seat, right? Am I going to have the same access to the amenities I need as somebody who needs a fixed desk, right? So somebody that's in accounting that needs to have a file cabinet and all of this stuff moved. Like how do we ensure that people feel like there's an equitable distribution of space? And then it comes down to communication, right? So you as an employee communicate what you need to do your best work, and then you as an employer or space planner or workplace leader make sure that people clearly understand why you have an allocation policy that you do, and make sure it's fair. Make sure that if you're asking one person to give up a desk, there shouldn't be somebody else across the hall in a private office. Unless it's absolutely necessary. So it again comes down to leadership and culture and making sound decisions.
In your experience, have you heard about those kinds of issues as well, where there's been kind of a difference in equity and that one person still has a desk and then somebody else is, or, something of that nature, where that has been an issue?
Yeah, it comes up all the time for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because organizations are slow to roll out things. They roll them out, by business function first, just to test and then iterate from there. And then they take that feedback. So it's really important as you're doing these things to, test, iterate, get feedback, and if necessary, pivot from the direction you're going if it's not working. But again, this is where data is so important, because the data you collect, both quantitative and qualitative, will help you, make and justify the decisions that you make.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you one quick example. We had one customer that decided that their firm was going to eliminate private offices for middle managers, and because it was not a justifiable use of space, and there was an uproar. Everybody freaked out. Everybody said, "I use my office every day." And then when they pulled out their sensor data that we collected over the last 6 months, we showed that less than 2% of the managers were in the office 2 days a week. And so it was a pretty easy data-driven decision that the offices were just not justifiable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, awesome. We have another question here. Should employers consider what incentive or benefits, should they consider incentive or benefits when coming into the office in one way or so? I think what they're asking is, can this be included in just an employee's incentive for how to work, for why they should come work for this company? And I feel like it's another, having some amenities and these abilities of just being able to help, support, employees on a hybrid schedule is just in general, a wonderful option.
Yeah, I saw an article recently about the top drivers for employees to choose their employer of choice. And after pay, the next one was sort of like the workplace amenities. Like, what am I getting myself into when I join a company? Are they receptive to remote working? Do they place a high value on collaboration and on my discretion to work in the way that works best for me? Mm-hmm. So I think it can definitely be used to incentivize people as a sort of an incentive to join a company.
Mm-hmm. And then, I think we have time probably for maybe one more question around then. But, we'll see how we progress. But this person asked, it sounds like adding personal amenities is highly recommended to include in the workplace, which makes me think of the hospitality industry. What, in your opinion, can the design of the corporate world learn from hospitality design in order to front load some of these amenities to help bring people back?
That's a really good question. And I mean, one that I hadn't considered before, but it's always a great feeling when you check into a hotel and there's a placard with your name on it and a bottle of wine that says, thanks for your loyalty with us. I mean, that always feels really good, right? So how do we take that experience and the way it makes the traveler feel and then translate it into the way we'd make an employee feel in the workplace? Maybe it's fresh fruit in the morning delivered to your desk, or having vitamin infused water available, as opposed to just I don't know exactly what the exact perks might be, but that's a really provocative idea. I think it's worth looking into.
Yes, absolutely. Creating that same hoteling experience just into your office, I think is pretty innovative thinking, and that could be where we're pretty much headed. I think, yeah, maybe we could have one more question officially. Do offices kind of and it kind of is similar to one that we had addressed earlier, but do offices allow staff to kind of sit anywhere? In a new system, where offices are more open, why can't a workstation person just sit in an office? We could kind of make it where instead of just having, there's people in cubicles and then some people get offices, could we just spread it around maybe and have everybody either in an office or in a work, like in an office instead of a workstation?
I think that's a great question, and it comes back to organizational culture. So I've seen companies that allocate neighborhoods for functional groups. So engineers have their own neighborhood, sales has their own neighborhood. You might not want those two neighborhoods too close to each other because salespeople are on the phone all the time and engineers do heads down work. So some of that thought goes into it, right? But then if you want some heads down time to do private work, do you have access to an office? I think the answer should be absolutely yes. But then again, it comes down to what space types and designs companies deploy. Some companies have focus rooms, which is like a small office you can go into and do heads down work. Some companies have executive offices that are open to anyone that needs an office for the day. So for example, you're entertaining the customer, or you have back-to-back meetings and you want a comfortable chair and a view of the bay or whatever it might be, right? I think that's very healthy. But then it's going to come down again. So just notice the recurring theme here. Many of these things are going to come down to company culture, right? And what is it? What is the culture that you want to drive for your organization? And which of these things does it support? So that's I think culture might be even like the number one consideration as folks are looking to evolve their workplace strategy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I imagine it's just culture in general has been shifting so much for so many different companies, especially that you've worked with and seeing that transformation. So yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to address today?
I think we're coming up on the top of the hour. So if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to thank everyone for sticking with us. This was fun, and we look forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Okay, so it looks like we are out of time. Hello, thank you again for talking with us today and sharing your insights about this webinar, and to VergeSense for sponsoring this webinar. And again, thank you to our audience. A recording from today's session will be made available on our magazine's website, facilityexecutive.com, and on vergesense.com as well. Thank you, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Cheers.